Hi, this is Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Janice Sharp, who is Gary McKinnon's mother. And we are just doing an update because we interviewed Gary a couple of years ago now, which was really a wonderful experience. And we are very interested, we happen to come to England, we're very interested in hearing what the status is on Gary's case. And who better than Janice to tell us exactly what is going on with Gary and the case.
Well, basically, the last judgment we got was against Gary, and they said he should be extradited. But since then, we've appealed, and we won the right to have a judicial review. They were actually trying to extradite Gary prior to Christmas, and normally you have 3 months to apply for a judicial review, but the government, actually our British government, gave us 7 days. And when Gary's solicitor appealed, they extended it to 14 days, and that wasn't very good. They also told her she had to expedite it, but Gary's solicitor, Karen Todner, is brilliant. She's very feisty. Karen Todner, she's very feisty, she's not afraid, and she said, well, no one can tell me to expedite my client's case, because basically it seemed very clear that our government wanted Gary away before Christmas, basically before the election started, because it's been making them quite unpopular because so many support Gary, so many people. So what happened, we applied for the judicial review, and a very hard-line judge, who's not known as a sort of, not knowing as being a liberal, and he has actually given us the judicial review, which is amazing, and he also gave us 41 days to put in the evidence, and he's given us more time to do other things. And also it's very rare for a judge of that level to actually come out and say very much, and he actually says that if all that has been said and the medical reports from Gary are true, that it's basically illegal, the decision to extradite Gary. So that's given us a lot of hope, and also in the meantime it gives us more time to put forward more points, basically. So we're incredibly pleased, and I feel we've reached 2010, and I feel much more optimistic about 2010, and I'm so glad to have 2009 gone. Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant.
So what you're saying is that during Christmas time there seemed to be a push to get Gary some of the personalities that you've worked with.
Well, initially actually, Sting came out for Gary. That wasn't my doing. He actually, suddenly I read in the papers, and he was saying it was awful and he should not be extradited, and he and his wife Trudy Styler, and they both have worked very hard and sort of really spoken out well for Gary, but they were upset about it. And afterwards, there was quite a big movement from people, UFO people, musicians, people with Asperger's, parents of children with autism. There's so many different groups of people that were for Gary, but I felt it needed that bigger push because the government had to listen. And I actually thought our government signed an extradition treaty with America, which means that any British citizen can be extradited with no evidence whatsoever. Whereas if we want to extradite an American, we have to provide probable cause. And that's actually evidence which an American can contest in court. And this gives them a safeguard. We don't have a safeguard. The Constitution in America protects them. We don't have any protection. And our government has basically thrown us to the dogs. And the reason is, it seems so desperate to ingratiate itself with the big boys, with America. And it was almost done to please. And it's been so bad for so many different families in the UK, and so many people are. We were told that this treaty was to be used for terrorists, and so far it's been used for anyone but. And people who are suspected of really heinous crimes, nothing's happening to them. You know, they go to the European Court of Rights, and they, you know, are given as a favour, and they will consider their cases. But the people who are totally non-violent and absolutely nothing to do with terrorism, they're the ones that are sort of suffering. I mean, Gary's been told he would get 10 years per count, 60 years if he didn't accept the prior plea bargain. And he was also, his solicitor was told in the American embassy, one state wanted to see him fry. For what? For sitting on a keyboard, a dial-up connection, looking for evidence and suppressed information of UFOs and free energy? I mean, why on earth would you want to give someone like that, who was in a 28K, really old-fashioned computer 8 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, why would you want to do that to someone? It's ludicrous. The whole thing is so out of proportion, you think, why? What is actually going on here? But anyway, I felt it needed this bigger push, and I thought, how can I do this? And because we're musicians, and I've always felt that a lot of musicians will stand up for justice, and they will speak out. They're not afraid. The government listens to them, because governments are very celebrity conscious. When they have elections, they have celebrities on board. So basically, I knew David Gilmour's brother-in-law, from Muswell Hill, and I got in touch with Joe. He knew Gary when Gary was younger, and he didn't even realise it was Gary. He was actually shocked. He knew all about the case. He says, God, I never realised it was Gary. And he got on to David, and I had already written letters to David, and David was amazing. Wilson, Gary's stepdad, did the backing track to the song Chicago. I asked Graham Nash if I could change the lyrics. Chicago was a song that was done about the Chicago 8 in the 60s, when a time of great injustice was going on. And that was what Graham Nash had written the song about. And I thought it was an ideal sort of protest song for real justice. So I asked him, could I change the lyrics, and he said yes, which was amazing. So what I changed it to was a direct appeal to Obama. So it was basically, would he please come from Chicago, stand up in London for our lives? Because I thought, I look at Obama and I think he's a good guy. I know people have conflicting opinions about this. I know all about the Obama conspiracy theory. I look at Obama and his wife and I see good people, and I still believe that. But I thought, to make him hear about it, I need people who are have got the stature to be able to get through to him. So David Gilmour was going on holiday with his family that night. Wilson emailed him the backing track, and he put on his vocal there and then before he left, which was incredible because he was really, really busy, and he did this before he left. After that, I got in touch with Bob Geldof's people, Sir Bob Geldof, and it was difficult. It was more difficult to get through to Bob Geldof, funnily enough, and eventually I did, and he also put his vocal on the track. And from there, David knows Chrissie Hynde quite well. She's American, from the Pretenders, and she agreed to do it, and that was just amazing. And also they had said, yeah, they would do the song, but they wouldn't do interviews, but they did. The whole thing, they actually took us down to Rack Studios, which is a big studio in London. They had Gary sing on the track. But Gary's a really good musician, but he was very nervous. He's been under so much stress, and mentally it's done so much harm to him, and he's changed so much that instead of being himself or singing naturally, he was very afraid. He stood very quiet, and I felt so sad for him, because under normal circumstances Gary would have been so natural, but he was very afraid. But he sang, and his voice is lovely as always. And when Chrissie Hynde walked in, she had a t-shirt with animal liberation, and I thought, yeah, because we're vegetarians and similar outlook, and I thought, good on her. Well, they actually broadcast it on television, and David Gilmour spoke up for Gary. He did an interview, Tracy Hines spoke up amazingly for Gary. She likened it to factory farming, leaving somebody sitting around for 8 years not knowing whether they're going to be extradited. And she actually said, I think it's going to work out. She said, but this is just what we have to do to get to where we have to be, which was quite a uplifting thing for me to hear. So that was really nice. So basically, that was it. It was to get the song to Obama's ears. Whether it has or not, I don't know. But I do know that Hillary Clinton knows all about Gary. I know that the American ambassador, because he's written in a newspaper, and basically they are still determined to take Gary. And they feel that he should be extradited. Well, in America it's different because it's all states. So you're more used to extradition from one state to another. This is an island. And to be dragged from the island you were born in is not natural or normal. It's against everything that's wrong. It just is so wrong. And also extradition was meant, if you've committed a crime abroad and you flee, it was meant to take you back to the country where you've committed the crime.
Right.
Gary's never been there. It wasn't meant to take you from your own country. And also, up until now, extradition has been for murder and horrendous crimes. It's now been used for all sorts of what we regard as low-level crimes. There's also a different mindset. In Britain, we don't take computer crime that seriously. And there's a sense of humour about it. And a lot of people who have hacked end up actually running security companies.
Sure.
In America, it's looked on as much more serious. And I think because of all the kind of things that have been happening in the world, there's a kind of paranoia. And I think that they're very determined to make an example of Gary. But what happened was, Gary admitted to computer misuse. This to me was his mistake, without a lawyer being present. He was arrested by the high-tech crime unit, the British high-tech crime unit, and he was told that he'd probably get 6 months community service. And he got
was
on,
misled.
He got on. I think it was genuine. They actually even said to him they would like someone like Gary to work for them, and Gary got on with them well. He says those are computer people, they're really nice. Gary's very naive. Since then we've found out there's so many things about Gary I could tell you about his childhood, how different he was, how he was, and actually it relates to Asperger's. People with Asperger's are intelligent, that's a criteria for it. They are often very articulate, which Gary is very articulate, and Gary since he's 2 years old used to talk about the stars and space, and which is pretty amazing for a 2-year-old. And he could read when he was 3. So when we actually saw the professor, Professor Simon Baron-Cohen, I said, well no, Gary can't have Asperger's because he could talk when he was 10 months, he could read when he was 3, he would talk about stars when he was 2. He says, no, that's Asperger's. He says, Asperger's high-functioning autism, they come on very fast. He says, but what it's like is, it's like living in a country where you speak a different language. He said, people with Asperger's can't read facial expressions. Gary used to, when he was younger, he bought a book and he was obsessed with learning body language. I thought, what's all this about body language, you know? But I realise now it's because he didn't understand body language. He also told us a long time ago he had difficulty knowing how to fit in with different people, so he would tend to be what they wanted with each person he was with. And it's because he didn't know quite how to react. Also, Gary has never been the tiniest bit racist, but apparently people with Asperger's don't see race, they see people. They also generally, this is very weird, have monotone voice. Gary has a monotone voice, a beautiful voice, and also they don't, the facial movements aren't as expressive. It's all very calm, and there's so many things. When Gary was a child, he used to scream if he went on buses, and I didn't understand why he'd scream when he was on buses. His friends all travel abroad. Gary never does. He doesn't leave North London. He wants to be at home. And I realise now all these things are part of it. It's a completely different way of seeing. But there's a Professor Atwood who's English and he lives in Australia, and he's written lots of books that lots of people with Asperger's relate more to computers than to people. And although he relates, you know, he can relate very well, but they actually relate very well to computers. And Gary's obsession, as you know, because you've spoken to him, he felt he was in a moral crusade. He felt if he could exposed the cover-up there was of free energy, that this could solve the world's energy crisis. Old people wouldn't die of cold, you wouldn't have the problems with climate change, and he genuinely believes that this evidence is suppressed. And actually right now he's working on a thing with magnets, trying to create his own thing, and his stepdad Wilson also get into this, and together they were working on a thing where, because they've looked at it since then, because you can actually find quite a lot of information on the internet about creating your own energy.
Yes.
He also was searching for, he believes anti-gravity is being suppressed, and information in UFOs and aliens. So he actually felt he was, but the mistake Gary made, apart from he shouldn't have done that, I mean, to go into the Pentagon, how silly is that? It's just crazy.
Right.
And Gary said, well, there was no passwords and no firewalls and thousands of machines, and he couldn't believe this. He couldn't believe his luck, to be honest, because he could find out all this information. But then he started to worry, why are there no passwords and no firewalls? So he was concerned. And I'm flitting around here, but we were at home and we watched 9/11 on the television. Gary was in our house at the time. And we cried. We just absolutely cried. We couldn't believe it. And we couldn't understand. The people were hanging out the windows. No helicopters were going up. Nobody was going to save the people. And we couldn't get this, because that always happens. They always go on the roofs. They always go up there. And what Gary said is he had left a message, which was really stupid, a cyber message, saying that he believed it was no accident, it was a stand down after 9/11, and that they were guilty of state-sponsored terrorism, the American government. The reason he explained to Professor Simon Baron-Cohen that he believed this was, he said there's a protocol in America that if a plane flies off course for even a few minutes, fighter jets are sent up, they monitor the pilots, they monitor the people, the travellers. It was off course for more than an hour and a half, and one flying towards the Pentagon, nothing went up. So Gary was desperately, he was a whistleblower, he was desperately trying to bring to their attention what was happening. He left notes saying, look, there's no security, there's no security. And he couldn't understand why no one was doing anything. He was shocked, and he kept sort of saying, you know, your security's crap, you know, what's happening here?
Yeah, so he was you know, a sort of a crusader, basically, for causes that he believed in at the time.
Absolutely.
And he was also young, he was naive,
Yeah.
and you know, and he was smoking dope at the same time, right?
He was, yeah. He actually was in a relationship, and as I said, Gary is very young for his age in ways, although he's very intelligent and he's very articulate, but he's always been immature for his age. And one time he got upset, I said that, and he says, his dad from Scotland was down, he says, I'm not immature for my age, I'm a dad, and he says, I'm afraid you are, son. But he is. And so he felt he was in this moral crusade. Sorry, tell me what you said again.
No problem. And he was how old when he originally did this so-called crime?
Yeah, I think he was about 35, I think he was then. But his girlfriend at 33 had wanted a baby. by it. So even she, as a 16-year-old girl, 15 I think she was, saw the vulnerability of Gary, you know, even then.
I understand. And what is it that actually, you know, do you think stimulated Gary to get on this whole UFO story? Do you think that he had, for example, abduction experiences when he was very, very young? Have you had any exposure to that?
No, when he was very young, he was always, as I say, fascinated by the stars, the planets. He would ask me questions I couldn't answer. He's always had a fascination. His stepdad Wilson was always into science fiction, and he lived at Bonnybridge, which is one of the biggest sightings for UFOs in the world.
Okay.
And Gary was quite obsessed with that. Gary knows about astral projection, and I'm going to sound off the wall here, but I mean, when I was younger, these things happened to me without me trying, and I was very scared of it. Because I didn't know what was happening to me. I had never heard of it before, and it wasn't actually until I met Wilson that he explained to me. It was an involuntary thing, and I eventually stopped it happening because to me it's scary. I mean, even though logically I don't think anything's going to happen, but instinctively it scares me. Gary actually tried it. He was interested in doing it, whereas me, I'm thinking, stop it, please. But Gary actually, I think it's happened to him once, but I don't think it was just that. Gary has had the fascination first. I mean, how many 2-year-olds talk about the stars and the planets and ask all these sort of incredible questions at 2 years old? I think that's pretty amazing. So somehow, you're born with certain, I don't know, everyone's, just like I came from a father who was a crofter, who farmed animals. I'm vegetarian and couldn't kill a fly, and it's nothing to do with my family, nothing to do with my upbringing, it's something that's in you. For some reason, Gary's always had an incredible fascination for what's happening out there. He always, it's something that he has, and with Wilson that inspired him even more.
And Wilson was his stepfather, you said?
Since he was 5, yeah.
Since he was 5?
Yeah, and,
Okay.
and that's actually sort of added to it because he was fascinated by all sort of stories and so on.
So he had that influence in a
Yeah,
parent,
yeah,
is what you're saying?
yeah.
Okay, very interesting. So to get back to the actual case and where we're at with the case, what is exactly where you were at now? Are you, in other words, you said you had 41 days.
Yeah.
And when did that 41 days start?
When it ends the 17th, the evidence got to be in by the 17th of this month.
Okay, of February.
Yeah.
Fabulous, okay.
Yeah.
So now has that been enough time for Karen Todner, her, I don't know, you call her the solicitor or do you call her?
She's a solicitor, and then you have the barrister, who's Ben Cooper.
Oh, right.
And he's young, and Ben is amazing. I mean, at 1 minute past 12 on New Year's Eve, he was working Gary's case. Karen also, she's on holiday, and she'll deal with Gary's case. They're amazing. They love Gary. When when we get the first good news in the court, Karen cried. And how many solicitors try. His QC is Edward Fitzgerald. That's Queen's Counsel. That's one of the best QCs, the best barristers there are if you're a Queen's Counsel. And he's one of a really well-known human rights lawyer. All over the world he works.
I see, okay. And so do you feel that this 41 days has been enough time to prepare? It's an appeal in essence, isn't it?
Yes, it's an appeal against the Home Secretary's decision to extradite Gary. It's basically saying that he was wrong. He didn't take account of all the different aspects of the evidence. And in a sense, they're testing the security by being non-paid. They're not being paid, they're testing the security, and if the security is bad, they can actually up it and make it better. But it's like saying, well, we don't want to arrest burglars. What we want is we want to, yeah, leave everybody's doors open, make an example of one, give them 60 years, and then you won't have to lock your doors at night. It's silly. It's completely silly. And
okay,
other people.
And that's a very good analogy. I agree with that. So basically, where is Gary at in terms of? This has been 8 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so for 8 years, he
8
is,
years in March coming.
I understand. So you've been working basically night and day on the case, it seems, and he's become kind of a cause celeb, I think you might call it, in this country at least.
Yeah.
You haven't had all that much publicity in the United States.
No, but we were offered it. They wanted us to do 60 Minutes, and a lot of people, CBS, wanted to do it, and we said no. I didn't want to put my head in America because I felt, you'll understand this, I feel if you put yourself somewhere, you draw yourself there. And if you start putting your head in America too much, you pull yourself there. It's like if someone, as they say, wants, I think I heard it in your show actually, wants to go to Taiwan, and they'll meet somebody in the train with a brochure for Taiwan, and it all becomes, it actually makes it.
So you create your own reality is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I felt if you put your head in America too much, you'll pull yourself towards America. But funnily enough, I did do Coast to Coast a couple of weeks ago, because it was a really nice woman, and she set it up, and she loves animals, I love animals, and I just thought she's a good person.
Okay.
And also I thought that the American people would be really angry and not like Gary, and he'd be seen as an enemy of the state. And lots of people phoned in that show, and they were lovely. They were so caring about Gary.
I have to say that I mean I don't think that Americans would find Gary to be an enemy of the state, but you know I also feel that our own interview showed his personality.
Absolutely,
for
it was
Americans,
incredible.
and
it was incredible.
And you know, and he's clearly a peaceful, loving individual.
Yeah.
And so I think it's wonderful that you are standing beside him, you know, in this battle, so to speak. And I think it is unfortunate that he's been made an example of, and the waiting of the 3 years I think is very questionable in terms of prosecuting him.
Yeah, it's very
In other
wrong.
words, what happened originally was he was basically found out, and then they waited until the law suited them to move on it.
That's it, exactly. That's what happened. And a lot of the callers who called in on the Coast to Coast show, they were very sympathetic to that, and they thought it was awful, and they were just so nice. And
well, and it's also, I mean, the fact of the matter is he was doing this at a time when his tools, using a dial-up modem, etc., were so primitive, and actually the whole idea of cybercrime at that point was just at the very beginning of anything that one could even call a crime.
Yeah.
There's also the aspect of his case which talks about damages, and it seems so absurd, knowing what I know about computers, that he created anything that would be worth money in terms of damages. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's one of the most, in my view, one of the most bogus accusations that they're making, that he actually could damage, for example, Pentagon or behind the scenes in NASA. I mean, the idea that a guy with a dial-up modem, even being as intrepid as he is and brilliant as he is, would be able to cause any kind of so-called damage, because you're talking about cyberspace, and you're talking about the government, and so if I mean, it just boggles the mind. I don't think it's possible that a young man of his age and you know, abilities and using the technical tools that he had at the time could have done any damage.
Yeah, well, that's it. Without the damage, it wasn't extraditable. It wasn't an extraditable offence. So what happened was, to be able to extradite, it had to be $5,000 of damage in each machine.
Exactly. Yes.
And what happened was, the prosecutors claimed there was $5,000 of damage in each machine, and they also said the same about the 6 universities Gary had gone into. And what happened is, because they indicted Gary and arrested Gary in 2002, but didn't apply for the extradition, and the universities came forward and said, no, he didn't do any damage. So they put out a superseding indictment, but all they did was withdraw the alleged damages to the universities. And Gary has always denied any damage, But what happened was at the last court hearing, I got a professor of computing who works for the police here quite often, so I thought I was the best one to get. And he said the damage was basically for security they should have installed in the first place. Gary didn't shut their machines down. They shut the machines down when they knew someone was on them. And when they knew someone was on was when a person in the university had informed them. And it wasn't immediately after 9/11. This is bogus. It was months after. It wasn't immediately after. But he's always denied the damage, and this professor said that the damage is, and funnily enough on that interview, and of course someone said, oh God, the next ad coming up costs more than $800,000. He says, so cheap at the price, is what they actually said.
Exactly. Well, again, I have to say that the damage claims are absurd, and in also looking back, because that's what we're doing here, we're having him be tried for something that he did in the past, which in essence there was no security, no obvious security, and one would wonder what exactly was really going on there. This is why we were very interested in the aspect of what he found, because it seems to us it's more about what he actually found than what he did. And when I say what he found, what I'm talking about is evidence of non-terrestrial officer lists, of off-world exploration and that sort of thing. And in essence, what we call the secret space program, it would be evidence for the existence of the secret space program. And that this is the real crux of the matter, and why Gary is being tried and sort of pursued the way he is. What's interesting about it is because of the way you and Gary have pursued the situation and defended the situation, and obviously your solicitor and so on, you have basically drawn more attention to the case.
That's true.
Than maybe was originally felt would happen. And so I think that you've done a good thing, because there has been more attention drawn to this kind of a thing, to the pursuit of finding evidence for UFOs, finding evidence for off-world exploration, and a secret space program, and so on. I am curious whether or not Gary had any sort of training in terms of astronomy.
No, he didn't, but he was always interested in it.
Right.
I mean, he didn't have, but he's
But
always
he didn't have any obvious schooling or science background.
No, not at all. I mean, Gary got 1 O-level at school, and because he would often get bored with things, but no, he didn't at all. On the contrary, a lot of people think it's because of what he knows. I actually think it's because they've escalated it so much that they feel they have to do something. And I think if Gary was extradited, I'd never see him again, because I think they've blown it up out of all proportion, so they would have to make him look really bad. And our Home Secretary actually came out and says, well, Gary McKinnon's accused of doing this, doing this, doing this. Well, if he's accused, that doesn't mean to say he's done it. And he said, we got as close to equality as we could because your constitution protects and you have probable cause. Well, what's to stop our government tomorrow saying that we demand probable cause? Nothing.
Right. It's a very interesting balance or imbalance of power in that
awful.
regard.
Yeah.
And certainly one would assume that the rights should be balanced. In other words, if one country wants to extradite, they should show probable cause.
Yeah.
And the same with the other country.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be a double standard.
Absolutely,
in essence.
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
I do
also
understand.
ACLU, they came out in favour of Gary, and they've said that it was wrong and they're against the treaty. And in the case that's coming up for Gary Liberty, which is the British equivalent, the sister organisation of ACLU, they are actually intervening in Gary's case, and they're actually going to represent Gary. But I thought it was amazing because we did a protest outside the American Embassy, and Liberty was there, and they had made all big aeroplanes, paper aeroplanes, saying keep Gary here, and had all the thing about the extradition, and the ACLU backed Gary. I thought that was fantastic.
Yes,
I mean,
it's wonderful to hear.
It was very good.
Now, I have to say that there, in America, you know, and I think it's very good that we're doing this interview, because in America, there are people out there who actually think that you have some kind of ulterior motive, that you might have a background in British intelligence or some craziness. And here we have you on camera, and we're able to sort of see, you know, in essence, you're kind of like an Earth Mother, you know, not at all the sort of persona that they're talking about. And
I think that's funny.
and I don't know if you've heard anything.
No, I haven't.
No, you haven't.
It's funny.
Okay, well, and it always amazed me, but that's what people come up with. You know, their minds go wild, and they're always looking for ulterior motives and all of this sort of thing. So it's lovely to have you here, and I want to thank you very much, Janice.
Thank you.
And thank you for your service to humanity, because I don't know if you realize it, but you are doing something for humanity in saving the earth.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Janice Sharp, who is Gary McKinnon's mother. And we are just doing an update because we interviewed Gary a couple of years ago now, which was really a wonderful experience. And we are very interested, we happen to come to England, we're very interested in hearing what the status is on Gary's case. And who better than Janice to tell us exactly what is going on with Gary and the case.
Well, basically, the last judgment we got was against Gary, and they said he should be extradited. But since then, we've appealed, and we won the right to have a judicial review. They were actually trying to extradite Gary prior to Christmas, and normally you have 3 months to apply for a judicial review, but the government, actually our British government, gave us 7 days. And when Gary's solicitor appealed, they extended it to 14 days, and that wasn't very good. They also told her she had to expedite it, but Gary's solicitor, Karen Todner, is brilliant. She's very feisty. Karen Todner, she's very feisty, she's not afraid, and she said, well, no one can tell me to expedite my client's case, because basically it seemed very clear that our government wanted Gary away before Christmas, basically before the election started, because it's been making them quite unpopular because so many support Gary, so many people. So what happened, we applied for the judicial review, and a very hard-line judge, who's not known as a sort of, not knowing as being a liberal, and he has actually given us the judicial review, which is amazing, and he also gave us 41 days to put in the evidence, and he's given us more time to do other things. And also it's very rare for a judge of that level to actually come out and say very much, and he actually says that if all that has been said and the medical reports from Gary are true, that it's basically illegal, the decision to extradite Gary. So that's given us a lot of hope, and also in the meantime it gives us more time to put forward more points, basically. So we're incredibly pleased, and I feel we've reached 2010, and I feel much more optimistic about 2010, and I'm so glad to have 2009 gone. Yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying is that during Christmas time there seemed to be a push to get Gary
people who are suspected of really heinous crimes, nothing's happening to them. You know, they go to the European Court of Rights and they, you know, are given as a favour, and they will consider their cases. But the people who are totally non-violent and absolutely nothing to do with terrorism, they're the ones that are sort of suffering. I mean, Gary's been told he would get 10 years per count, 60 years if he didn't accept the prior plea bargain. And he was also, his solicitor was told in the American embassy one state wanted to see him fry. For what? For sitting on a keyboard, a dial-up connection, looking for evidence and suppressed information of UFOs and free energy? I mean, why on earth would you want to give someone like that, who was in a 28K, really old-fashioned computer 8 or 9 years ago, why would you want to do that to someone? It's ludicrous. The whole thing is so out of proportion, you think, why? What is actually going on here? But anyway, I felt it needed this bigger push, and I thought, how can I do this? And because we're musicians, and I've always felt that a lot of musicians will stand up for justice, and they will speak out. They're not afraid. The government listens to them, because governments are very celebrity conscious. When they have elections, they have celebrities on board. So basically, I knew David Gilmour's brother-in-law, from Muswell Hill, and I got in touch with Joe. He knew Gary when Gary was younger, and he didn't even realise it was Gary. He was actually shocked. He knew all about the case. He says, God, I never realised it was Gary. And he got on to David, and I had already written letters to David, and
some of the personalities that you've worked with.
Well, initially, actually, Sting came out for Gary. That wasn't my doing. He actually, suddenly I read in the papers, and he was saying it was awful and he should not be extradited. And he and his wife, Trudy Styler, and they both have worked very hard and sort of really spoken out well for Gary, but they were upset about it. And afterwards, there was quite a big movement from people, UFO people, musicians, people with Asperger's, parents of children with autism. There's so many different groups of people that were for Gary that I felt it needed that bigger push, because the government had to listen. And I actually thought our government signed an extradition treaty with America, which means that any British citizen can be extradited with no evidence whatsoever. Whereas if we want to extradite an American, we have to provide probable cause. And that's actually evidence which an American can contest in court. And this gives them a safeguard. We don't have a safeguard. The Constitution in America protects them. We don't have any protection, and our government has basically thrown us to the dogs. And the reason is, it seems so desperate to ingratiate itself with the big boys, with America, and it was almost done to please. And it's been so bad for so many different families in the UK, and so many people we were told that this treaty was to be used for terrorists, and so far it's been used for anyone but, and people